Barron Trump had always been curious about his family heirloom. He was born into a well-respected family that people envisioned as perfect and surreal. But the question that had always lingered in his mind while growing up was, how much of it was real, and how much of it was just perception? So today, even when his professor stood in front of the class and tried to shade his father over a topic that had nothing to do with him, he had the perfect answer to give. Unlike the professor, he had made his findings and was certain of the kind of man his father truly was. Barron's response to the liberal professor shocked everyone who witnessed the incident. But what did the young Trump say? Barron Trump sat in his father's study, surrounded by walls lined with awards, framed magazines, and photographs that captured decades of power. His father's legacy was a spectacle to behold, one that people either revered or despised. Barron often wondered if he could live up to the legacy his father had built over the years. His father, Donald Trump, was not just a businessman. He was an idea, a force, a symbol of wealth, ambition, and defiance. He had heard his grandfather's story 1,000 times, and sometimes he struggled to believe the truth from the myth. The most official version was that a young entrepreneur had taken a $1 million loan from Fred Trump and turned it into a multi-billion-dollar empire. Critics had argued this fact, saying his wealth wasn't built from the ground up, but was inherited as a form of generational privilege. Donald Trump had a natural flair for real estate. He transformed rundown properties into luxury hotels and casinos, making New York his personal kingdom. The Grand Hyatt, Trump Tower, Trump Plaza. His name became synonymous with affluence and power, yet his business was often marked by controversy and bankruptcy. Trump Airlines, Trump Steaks, Trump Vodka, and each venture followed a familiar pattern. First, a grand announcement of its opening, flashy branding, then finally a financial collapse. Despite every setback, he endured and came back stronger, better, and bigger. Although he could lose millions at a goal, the public never saw him as a failure because perception was more important than reality in America. It was true that Barron's grandfather, Fred Trump, had built the foundation of their wealth. He was a strict and ruthless businessman. He operated in the shadows, focusing on real work, buying lands, developing affordable housing, and using government loans to build his fortune. On the other hand, Donald Trump understood something his father, Fred, didn't. Business wasn't just about real estate. It was about branding. He used the Trump name on everything he owned: skyscrapers, airlines, and cologne. Even buildings he didn't own carried his name, for people to believe it was his and make sales. His older siblings had followed different paths. Eric Trump had become the public face of the Trump organizations and managed its day-to-day affairs. At the same time, Ivanka Trump had transitioned from business to politics, serving as the White House advisor. Then there was Barron, the youngest and quietest Trump, the one who never spoke out, never made waves, and was never seen. People speculated about him. Some saw him as an enigma, while others felt he was being groomed for greatness. But he wasn't even sure about what he wanted from life yet. The biggest shocker in Donald Trump's legacy wasn't his business success. It was his transition from a business mogul to becoming the president. No one had taken candidacy seriously, and that made it even more interesting. Pundits laughed at the idea of a businessman becoming the leader of the country with the world's power. However, his ability to control the business space, command attention, and speak in a way that resonated with millions of Americans was an added advantage and made him unstoppable. His presidency was a whirlwind of tax cuts, trade wars, Supreme Court appointments, Twitter battles, and impeachment hearings. He polarized the nation like no other figure in modern history. To his supporters, he was a champion of the people, a fighter against political corruption. To his critics, he was a dangerous weapon waiting to be unleashed. Barron had watched it all unfold, not as a politician, but as a son. He saw the stress in his father's face, how he thrived in conflict, yet seemed to crave validation, and how power energized and drained him. Barron knew that no matter what he did, he would always be compared to his father. As he sat in the study, staring at a framed photo of his father shaking hands with world leaders, he asked himself a question he had never dared to ask. Who was his father beyond the family name? Not the brand, not the president, just the man. It wasn't something he could ask him directly. His father wasn't one to have deep and sentimental conversations. He spoke deals, numbers, and projects. That was his kind of interest. Barron scrolled through his laptop and began reading and watching news articles, interviews, and decades of footage about his father from before he was born. His father's name was everywhere, stamped on buildings, whispered in boardrooms, and shouted in rallies. After more online research, he decided to visit the Trump Tower and gather more information. He slipped past the security with a casual, just looking around explanation. No one barely noticed him until a janitor did. "Are you lost, kid?" he asked. "No," Barron said. Then after a long pause, he said, "Did you ever work with my dad?" "Sure," the man replied, grinning. In the 90s, he had stormed in here with his guys talking about the next big project and deal they had embarked on. Always moving, planning, and selling. He could charm his way through anything. Barron had expected this, but he wanted to hear something more real and natural outside of work. So he thanked the janitor and went on looking around the building. He saw a big door leading to another office. He figured it would be his father's, so he went in. The office was well arranged, and it seemed his father had not been in for a long time. He sat on the chair behind his desk, looking around admiringly. Suddenly, something caught his attention. He saw a drawer by the side of the desk and reached to open it. Inside was an old rusty camera. He took it and reviewed the saved files, playing each video as he scrolled. He gasped. Was the man in these videos his father? This was not like anything he had ever seen. In the files were videos of his father and his friends just being normal, happy people, eating, laughing, and having fun. In another file, he saw videos of his father and mother during their courting days. His father was a really gentleman and a romantic, so this was what his father was like before the fame and exposure. Barron smiled, took the camera, and headed for home. His questions were finally answered. All his father cared about was not limited to money, statues, and influence. He was actually a man filled with love and warmth outside of the whole business and politics charade. Summer break was over, and Barron was back in college. It was Monday morning, and he was seated in a class taken by one of his least favorite professors, Dr. Adrian Keller. The professor was known for his sharp wits and unapologetic critiques of conservative politics. This morning, he stood at the front of the lecture hall and surveyed his students with a smirk. His piercing gaze rested on Barron Trump. Unlike his father, Barron wasn't one to seek attention. He sat quietly in the third row, his posture straight, hands resting on his notebook. Unlike the other students, he was never tense around Dr. Keller. At least he had no reason to be scared of him. He didn't fidget or chuckle nervously whenever he made any of his trademark snide comments. Today, we would discuss the illusion of leadership in modern politics, Dr. Keller began, adjusting his glasses slightly. There are many examples we could look at in this scenario, but let's start with something more real and precise. A man we all know, whose name is synonymous with power, influence, and controversy. And let's be honest about our opinions. A few students chuckled, others smirked, knowing exactly where this was going. Dr. Keller's lip curled. The almighty Donald Trump, the businessman turned president, who somehow convinced half the country he was a competent leader. He turned to the class, gesturing grandly. Now tell me, class, what is the first word that comes to your mind when you think of this man called Donald Trump? The responses came fast. Narcissist, a liar, an entertainer, a racist, and a hater, Keller chuckled. All valid. His gaze flickered toward Barron, waiting, taunting. However, perhaps the most accurate word that duly describes him is fraud. A man born into wealth who masquerades as self-made. A man who built a career on lawsuits, bankruptcies, and deception. All this while he spoke, looking directly at Barron, who didn't react or even blink. Dr. Keller leaned forward. Tell me, Barron, what's it like growing up in the shadow of a man like that? A hush fell over the room. Some students leaned in, eager for drama. Others shifted uncomfortably. Barron finally spoke, his voice calm. Do you want an answer or just want a reaction? Dr. Keller hesitated. The boy's tone wasn't defensive. It was measured. It was calculated. I want the truth, Dr. Keller, masking his surprise and disappointment. Barron tilted his head. The truth is, you don't actually hate my father. You're just being petty or looking for a reason to hate. Dr. Keller scoffed. Oh, I assure you, I do dislike him. No, Barron objected with a smirk. You only hate that you can never measure up to him. The classroom fell into stunned silence. Dr. Keller's jaw clenched. Excuse me, did you just say that to me? He was beyond surprised to hear Barron speak that way, because he hadn't heard him talk like that before. Barron leaned forward, locking eyes with the professor. You mock my father because you resent him, because deep down, you know that no matter how much you criticize him, you will never be as influential, as known, or as powerful. The professor let out a dry laugh. Influential? You think being infamous is the same as being respected? Barron shrugged. You tell me. If my father is such a joke, why do you spend so much time talking about him? The words hit harder than he had expected. Dr. Keller felt something twist in his gut, an emotion he didn't want to name. A student from the back hesitantly raised his hand. Professor, didn't you used to admire Donald Trump? Is there a backstory to why you hate him now? Dr. Keller's face darkened. Where did you hear such nonsense? Another student brought out his phone, reading from an old article. Dr. Adrian Keller, 1995. Donald Trump is a figure whose boldness and refusal to follow convention is something young entrepreneurs should study. Whispers immediately began to spread across the room. Dr. Keller's past admiration for Trump was public record, though he had spent years burying it beneath layers of scorn. Barron studied him for a moment before he said, My father was once your idol. So what happened, Professor? Dr. Keller's grips on the podium tightened. You really want to know? All right, I will tell you. Everyone immediately straightened up to listen to the tale that had unfolded between the professor and Donald Trump. Adrian Keller was born in the cramped area of New York City. His parents were average citizens. They weren't poor, but they weren't well off either. Money was always tight and not easy to come by. Keller learned early in life that if he wanted something, He had to earn it through hard work. His escape from his reality was books. While other kids played outside, Adrian spent hours at the public library, devouring biographies of great businessmen, Carnegie, Rockefeller, and his favorite of all was Henry Ford. He didn't just want to be rich, he also wanted to be powerful and influential. By age 10, he had convinced himself that his destiny was to build an empire. However, his family didn't understand his dreams and ambitions. "Why don't you study to be a doctor?" his mother asked. "They make good money." "Or a lawyer," his father suggested. "Steady pay, lots of respect." However, Adrian wasn't interested in stability, which could become unstable at any slight inconvenience. He wanted outstanding greatness. In high school, Keller's hunger for success grew. He excelled in debates, finance club, and business competitions, earning a reputation as the smartest kid in the room. However, intelligence alone wasn't enough. He needed connections to reach his aspirations, and his family had none. His next point of interest was to find a way to connect with a wealthy source, and then he could begin from there. That was all he ever thought about, and he looked forward to it. He got his first taste of wealth when his best friend Ethan invited him to a weekend at his family's estate in the Hamptons. The Ethan family had old money and generational wealth from bankers and investors. Their mansion had a pool, private tennis courts, and a staff of servants. That weekend changed Keller's life. He realized something crucial. Success wasn't just about talent, but access. He studied how the Ethan family spoke and carried themselves. Their confidence wasn't just arrogance, it was certainty that the world was under their feet. There and then, Keller decided he would have the world under his feet too. With relentless drive, he secured a scholarship to Harvard Business School. He wasn't like the rich kids who partied their way through college. He worked harder and networked smarter. By his second year, he was already planning his first venture, a real estate startup focusing on flipping undervalued properties in New York. Everything was falling into place, or so he thought. Keller graduated and was eager to prove himself. His first real estate deal, a small apartment complex in Brooklyn, seemed promising. He secured a loan, brought in 2 investors, and started renovations. He looked up to people like Donald Trump, and it was during this period that he had written an article about him. Then the market crashed. The stock market collapsed, wiping out his funds overnight. His investors pulled out. The bank called in for his loan payments. He was forced to sell the property at a massive loss, barely escaping bankruptcy. The failure crushed him. He had done everything right, worked hard, and planned carefully, but was still lost. He saw the same investors who abandoned him throw money into bigger developers. People like Donald Trump who basically needed no investment at all. While Keller struggled, Trump's empire was booming. Trump was living his dream effortlessly. He saw Trump's name plastered across the whole city. Trump's Tower, Trump Plaza, Trump Internationals. Trump wasn't just succeeding, he was thriving, and Keller hated every bit of it. Here he was, humiliated and broke. He had to take a corporate job to survive. He worked in consulting, then finance, but his heart wasn't in it. The dream of building an empire felt further away than ever. One day, an old Harvard professor, Dr. William, invited him to speak at a university seminar on business ethics. Keller hesitated. He hadn't succeeded in business. What could he possibly teach? However, when he stood in front of the classroom, something clicked. He wasn't just talking about business. He was exposing the illusion of power and the flaws in the system. He didn't just discuss success, he analyzed why some men, like Trump, could fail and still rise while others, like himself, got crushed. Since then, any opportunity he saw to speak against Trump, he did so heartily. Keller abandoned business altogether and decided to pursue academia full-time. He earned his PhD in political economy and became a professor dedicated to teaching students how power really worked. He published many books on politics, but no matter how many books he wrote or how respected he became, he could never let go of his resentment toward Donald Trump. Deep down, Adrian Keller still wanted to be the man he had once dreamed of becoming. Finally, he saw his chance. He was privileged to meet Donald Trump at a business conference he attended, and he decided to give it a shot, even though he still didn't like the man. He still had business ideas and ambitions, so he thought if he could impress Donald Trump with them, he would see his potential and help him invest, or maybe mentor him. Unfortunately, Donald barely acknowledged him. Instead, he dismissed Keller's ideas. This made his hatred for Donald grow without measure. Keller felt Donald Trump represented everything wrong with America. The powerful crushing the ambitious, the rich making sure the rest of the people stay small. Keller wanted to be like Donald Trump, and when he wasn't validated, he resented him. Dr. Keller was done telling his story in the room filled with students. A different kind of silence filled the room, not the expectant hush of students waiting for an argument, but something heavier. Dr. Keller felt a rush of heat rise to his face. He had spent years crafting his image, the brilliant professor, the fearless intellectual, the man who dissected power with surgical precision, yet he just stood before teenagers and calmly pulled apart the very foundation of his persona. For the first time, he felt so empty, rather than fulfilled. Finally, he sighed and ran his hand through his graying hair. "I don't like your father," he said to Barron. And maybe all of it is personal, but that doesn't mean he's a good man. Barron nodded. And it doesn't mean he's a bad one either. The professor stared back at him for a long moment. Then, to everyone's shock, he let out a small chuckle. You're nothing like him, you know. Barron smiled slightly. Maybe, he replied. The lecture ended. Students left, murmuring about what had just unfolded. Some were stunned at how Barron handled and stood up for his father, while others were simply impressed. Dr. Keller remained behind, staring at the empty seats. He had spent years defining himself as the anti-Trump, the intellectual warrior fighting against ignorance. Yet today, his interaction with a teenager had forced him to ask himself a terrifying question. What if I've been fighting a shadow of my own making? For the first time, Dr. Keller had no answer to his own question. Although Barron felt bad about how Dr. Keller talked about his father, he couldn't shake off the look on the man's face after their heated exchange in class. The man had spent years mocking his father, but beneath all that scoring, Barron saw something else: regret. That night in his room, he made a decision. Dr. Keller deserved a second chance, because villains aren't always born. They are made. He didn't want Dr. Keller to continue living with his hatred toward his family. The next afternoon, Barron approached him after class. Professor, he said, what if you had another shot at the business world? Dr. Keller scoffed. I think that ship sailed a long time ago, Barron. But what if it hasn't? Barron pressed. What if I introduce you to my father? Keller's eyes narrowed. Why would you do that? Barron shrugged. Maybe because I think you're wasting your talent. Dr. Keller hesitated. He spent most of his life resenting Donald Trump, yet here was his son offering him the one thing he had always wanted, a chance to matter again in the eyes of someone he loved. A week later, Dr. Keller found himself sitting in Trump's tower, across from the man he had spent years criticizing. Donald Trump leaned back in his chair, studying him. So you're the professor who hates my guts? That makes us even, because I hate them too, he joked. Dr. Keller giggled. Trump continued. Barron says you know business. Is that true? Dr. Keller straightened. I used to. Good, Trump said. Then prove it. He slid a folder across the table. Dr. Keller opened it. Inside was information about a struggling Trump-owned property, a resort on the verge of shutting down. You run this place, Trump said. Turn it around, and we will talk about me investing in your own idea. Kelly stared at him. Why me? Trump looked at him blankly. Because my son recommended you. Everyone laughed, and Dr. Keller signed the papers. He was determined to do all it took to get that business back on its feet and prove himself a worthy businessman. What do you think of how Barron handled the backlash against his father? Would you do the same if confronted with a similar situation? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this video was inspiring, like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Before you go, click the links on your screen for more insightful videos. You can also tap the bell icon to get a notification for new posts. See you next time.